The purpose of this video is to give you an overview or review of the components of introductions and backgrounds for technical reports. In technical reports, introductions have a particular structure. They often use this inverted triangle structure where you begin a bit more broad and general and you narrow down to a specific topic or focus. First, you begin broadly. You don't want to begin too broadly in the sense that you say something like since the dawn of time or in today's society, but you want to start broadly enough that you're able to provide a general overview and context of the background information that a reader might need to know to understand a topic. So for instance, if you're looking at something with solar power and what you're researching has to do with solar power, you might begin by talking about the dangers of climate change and the need for renewable energy. After you state that general overview and the context, you then give the problem statement. What is the issue or problem that your proposal is taking up or that your report is looking at and trying to solve? This often begins with this phrase, however, which offers the reader a sense that you're about to turn and look at the problem. Your goal here is to establish a gap. What has been done, what hasn't been done, and what are you going to do about it? By establishing the problem, you give the reader a good sense of a bridge from the context to the final section of the introduction, which is your purpose. What is it that you're accomplishing in this report? So the purpose should be clearly outlined and state what it is, your goals, and what you are intending to do, what you want the reader to take away from this report. An introduction should be more than one paragraph. Typically, a couple of paragraphs is standard. You often would see 3 or more. In a lot of proposals, you'll often have a literature review that would be embedded within the actual introduction. Often this literature review would fall in between stating the problem and then giving the purpose of the report. But since in this context, your background section is separate from the introduction. However, there is a link that you want to introduce topics or ideas that you then take up in more detail in the background section. So the essential goal of your background section is to provide a literature review. A literature review offers the reader context about what's already been said on this topic or about this problem, as well as providing some of the technical details and background that they would need to know to understand what it is you're accomplishing in the report. So while the background might not be specific to your project in the sense that it's the procedures or exactly what you're planning to do, it is providing the background science that your reader needs to understand why what you're doing matters and how it's emerging from previous work. Essentially, you want to pick a few topics and summarize the key literature for each of those topics. Each topic would depend on whatever your project is focusing on, but you might have 3 or 4 in this case, and you want to divide it up carefully and think about it. The big thing to keep in mind is they aren't source by source. You're not summarizing the source as much as you're synthesizing the information about a given topic. So you want to choose the topics that are most relevant to your report. So how does this work in practice? I've provided an example of a report introduction from a senior design project in the past. And if you look at these 3 paragraphs, you see that it moves very quickly from those 3 sections that I outlined about what should be in an introduction. If you look at the very first paragraph, you see that they're providing the overarching context and background. They're introducing the sponsor as well as the product that they're looking at in particular. So here you have some of that background information. And while this team could have started off a little bit differently by talking about the overarching goal or the context that they're responding to, what is this product and what is it supposed to be doing, you do see that they get that in this first paragraph. In addition, toward the end, they start to give you a little bit of detail that introduces and transitions into the second paragraph, which is where they state their problem. So you see this despite the benefits of the product, which is your signal that they are about to say, we have some issues. And then the final paragraph moves into what they are going to do about the problem. Now that they've given you the introduction to the material and the problem, the background focuses on giving you more of the technical background about the product and about the various elements that will be important to this project. Since the project focuses so heavily on the material alloy, it makes sense that they begin their background by breaking down what alloy is and getting at the various technical elements of the product itself. So they first state what the product is made up of in terms of what it comprises the alloy, and then they go into some of the different content as well as how it is formed. Then they move into talking about the hardening and the strengthening, and then kind of what happens in that process. And so they're going through and giving you some of the different elements of the process and how it relates to the material itself. Toward the end, you start to see too large of a precipitate and the dislocations are more likely to cut through the precipitate, too small and the dislocations are more likely to bow around the dislocation. And so that essentially introduces some of the issues and problems that are likely to be important later when they begin talking about their technical approach. This part of the technical background then goes into more detail about some of the things that happen when the material is aged at a different temperature and the technical background involved in that process. And so what they're doing here is providing more of that background that is affecting their problem, but is also setting the stage for the technical approach section to come. They end by talking a little bit more about some of these other sections, and while this background in particular could do a better job of maybe connecting the individual points of the background section, they do a nice job of keeping the background focused on the specifics of this project, the context, and some of the information that the reader needs to know in order to understand their technical approach, which is about to come. So keep in mind that your background doesn't have to be exhaustive. You don't have to cover every single little bitty thing, but you do want to think about what are sort of the key ideas and where your research is that you can pull in to support what it is you're doing in your project. So to summarize, introductions set the scene. They provide background and context to the project that you're working on, and they also establish what the topic is and what is sort of the important information. An introduction will clearly state what the problem is. If you do not have a clear problem statement, then your reader is left wondering about the so what. Why does this topic matter? What is the problem that you're trying to address? When you do a lit review or a background section, you expand on that context, commenting on what's been said about the topic or the problem. One of the problems with that background that I provided you is that I felt like they could have provided more citations. So you do want to cite really, really actively in this section and make sure that you're pulling in that literature review to help you understand what's going on about your problem and your project. And finally, your introduction will conclude with an overview of the report's focus, and it will often be very explicit in that it outlines the key elements that you'll be discussing or covering within your report itself. So I hope that this video is helpful just to refresh yourself or give you some good background about what an introduction and a background section do, and also how they connect to each other and begin the foundation of what your report will be as you move into the future sections.